I woke up at 2 a.m. because of a strange sound in the backyard, a constant scratching noise mixed with the sound of dirt hitting the wooden planks around Robert's memorial garden. I sat up, my heart beating harder than usual. At my age, it's rare for me to startle awake in the middle of the night, but that sound didn't resemble a cat or a squirrel. I walked to the window. The yard light cast a glow on a prominent figure with its head down, digging, its front legs sending clumps of dirt flying. When it stopped and turned toward the house, the moonlight was bright enough for me to recognize the dark brown fur and the familiar eyes. Shadow. The dog Tyler, my son-in-law, said had been put down just 3 days earlier, the dog I had cried over, believing I'd lost him. Yet there he was, panting, covered in mud and blood, looking at me as if trying to tell me something. I was stunned. My whole body went cold, like I had stepped into a gust of wind. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. In this community, we believe the lives of older folks still have many unforgettable chapters left. Subscribe to stay with me, because what comes next is far more surprising. And this is how everything began. Back when I still thought life would slowly return to peace after Robert's funeral. Robert's funeral took place on a windless morning. Many people came, each giving me a sad look or a gentle hug. I tried to stay composed, but at times I had to clench my hands together to keep them from trembling. When the hymn ended, the church doors opened and Emily walked in. My daughter had grown noticeably thinner since the last time I saw her. She wore a long-sleeved black dress despite the heat, her hair tied up hastily, her gaze shifting away the moment I looked toward her. Tyler followed right behind, his hand on Emily's back as if guiding her. They both looked tense, though I didn't understand why. After the service, when people began to leave, I stood alone near the door. Frank Doyle approached me. He had been Robert's friend since their youth and had worked in law enforcement for over 30 years. Frank placed a hand on my shoulder and said softly, "Marion, there's something Robert asked me to give you." He led me to the back parking lot. There, his old SUV was parked. He opened the back door and a large dog slowly lifted its head to look at me. A German shepherd, strong-built but with calm eyes. "This is Shadow," Frank said. "Robert wanted you to have him." I froze. "What? Robert? When?" Frank pulled a folded piece of paper from his shirt pocket. Just 4 lines written in Robert's familiar handwriting, a bit shaky like in his final days. "There are things on the road ahead I can't protect you from. Shadow will take my place. Trust Frank. I love you." I exhaled slowly. Everything hit me at once. The loss, the surprise, the feeling that Robert had been trying to warn me about something. "I know this is hard for you right now," Frank said, but Robert was very clear. Shadow is well trained. He's gentle, and he'll help you. I looked into Shadow's deep black eyes. Something about him felt calm, steady, as if he had been waiting for this moment. I nodded. "All right, I'll take him home." Frank smiled faintly. Robert would be at peace. Shadow had been with me less than 2 days when Tyler came by. He brought a bag of groceries, saying he was just stopping by to see if I needed anything. I was in the kitchen when I heard Shadow's footsteps moving quickly toward the living room. By the time I followed him out, the two were already facing each other. Tyler stiffened when he saw the dog. The color drained from his face in a way that didn't resemble surprise at seeing a big animal indoors. More like he was seeing something he didn't want to face. He narrowed his eyes, straightened his posture, and gripped the bag's handle tightly. Did this dog come from, Mom?" he asked, trying to sound calm. "Robert asked Frank to bring him to me," I said. "His name is Shadow." Shadow stood right in front of my feet, head lowered slightly, ears erect. I hadn't seen him like this since he came home. No barking, no growling, but every bit of his attention was locked onto Tyler, tracking every tiny movement. Tyler stepped back half a pace. I saw it clearly. "A dog this big. Are you sure you can handle him, Mom?" Tyler asked, his voice tinged with tension. "Shadow is very gentle," I said. "Frank told me he was well trained." Tyler nodded, but his eyes stayed glued to Shadow, as if assessing something. I didn't understand why a dog could make him this uneasy. When he left, Shadow followed him to the door and stood watching until his car disappeared. Only when I closed the door did he relax. The next afternoon, Emily called me. Her voice was small and shaky. "Mom, big dogs. Are they safe?" Tyler said sometimes they can be unpredictable. "He's very gentle," I answered. "What are you worried about?" Emily paused and said, "No, nothing. I was just asking." But the way she spoke made me feel she was hiding something. Ever since the funeral, Emily had seemed distant. Every sentence felt cautious, like she was afraid someone might be listening. It worried me more each day, though I didn't know where to begin asking. A week later, Tyler came again. This time, he didn't bring food. He said he was just dropping by to check on me. But instead of sitting and talking, he kept roaming around the house, observing too carefully. He stared at the back door for a long time, tugged it slightly to check if it was locked. He glanced at the security camera I'd installed by the porch, then asked, "This camera works, right, Mom?" I nodded. He looked around the sides of the door, studying the blind spots and pathways as if mapping out something. Shadow never took his eyes off him. Every time Tyler stepped close to me, Shadow moved in between us, gently, but on purpose. Once when Tyler bent down to pick up a water bottle on the floor, Shadow let out a low growl that made my skin prickle. Not loud, not aggressive, but unmistakably a warning. "This dog has issues, Mom," Tyler said, forcing a crooked smile. "Maybe I should take him to get checked." "That's not necessary," I replied. "Shadow is perfectly fine." Tyler stared at me for a long moment. His eyes didn't show concern. They looked calculating. When he finally left, Shadow ran to the door and watched, the fur along his back still raised. I petted him, feeling the tension in his body. For the first time, the thought crossed my mind that Shadow might be trying to protect me from my own son-in-law. I didn't want to believe it, but the feeling persisted, growing stronger and impossible to ignore. A few days later, Tyler stopped by with a stack of hand-drawn sketches. He spread them out across the kitchen table, smiling as he said, "I thought you might want a memorial garden for Dad Robert. I designed it myself. Take a look." I was surprised. The garden plan was incredibly detailed, from flower beds and stone paths to an extended bench for sitting. It looked like something drawn by a professional. I was genuinely touched. Part of me thought, maybe I had misjudged Tyler. "Thank you. This means a lot," I said. Tyler gave a small smile, but it wasn't a relaxed one. It felt strained. The next day, he began working on it. He brought wood, soil, and stones and built the planting beds with remarkably sturdy hands. I stood nearby watching, feeling a swelling gratitude, believing this was his way of honoring Robert. Unlike me, Shadow didn't seem to like the new garden. He kept hanging around one particular corner of the yard. Every time I loosened his leash, Shadow would run straight to that exact spot, lower his head to sniff, then dig a few strokes. Not frantically, but consistently enough that it was impossible to ignore. "That's not good," I whispered to Shadow. "You're ruining the soil." Tyler, who was measuring the ground nearby, heard me and turned immediately. When he saw Shadow digging in that corner, he dropped his measuring tape and hurried over. "Keep the dog away from that spot," he barked, unable to hide the panic in his voice. I flinched. "Tyler, he's just digging a little. It's fine." "No, you don't understand," he said. "That area, the soil's loose. I just laid the foundation. If he digs it up, everything collapses." I looked at the spot Shadow was digging. The soil was soft, but not like something that had just been laid. It looked like it had been dug up before and filled back in. Deep. I frowned slightly. Tyler stood close beside me, overly anxious. Shadow stayed there, eyes fixed on Tyler. After a moment, Tyler tried to regain his composure, but the fear still clung to his expression. A few days later, Emily came to visit. She wore long sleeves again, this time made of fabric even thicker than before. The weather was over 30 degrees. I opened the door and quietly asked, "Aren't you hot, Emily? Why are you dressed like that?" "I'm used to it, Mom," Emily replied, avoiding my eyes. Shadow stepped out from the living room. When Emily sat on the couch, I saw her sleeve slip up just a little. There was a purple-blue bruise on her wrist. She pulled the sleeve down immediately. I didn't have time to ask before Tyler walked in from the backyard, still wearing gardening gloves covered in dirt. He placed his hand on Emily's shoulder, a light gesture meant to soothe. Shadow growled instantly, a low, deep sound but unmistakably clear. I jolted. Tyler nudged Shadow away. "You really need to retrain that dog, Mom. Something's wrong with it." I looked at Shadow, then at Emily. When Tyler touched her, Emily had flinched, a small, involuntary reaction no one could fake. A suspicion I had pushed aside since the beginning crept back into my mind. This time, it wasn't subtle at all. Shadow wasn't behaving randomly. His reactions were tied to particular moments. I stood in the middle of the memorial garden Tyler was building, looking at my daughter, at the dog, and then at that soft patch of dirt. Something important was buried under that soil and under the surface of my family. It was Thursday. I had just returned from a friend's house when I saw Tyler's car parked right outside. He stood on the porch, his left arm wrapped in a bandage from wrist to near his elbow. His face looked paler than usual, though he tried to appear calm. "What happened, Tyler?" I asked as I stepped onto the porch. He glanced at his bandaged arm and took a short breath. "Shadow attacked me, Mom." I froze. "That's impossible. Shadow has never—" He cut me off, voice tightening. "I know you trust him, but the truth is, he bit me. When I came by to check on the garden, he lunged out of nowhere. I had to get 8 stitches. My head felt like it was swelling. Partly from worry about Shadow, partly because all of this was happening too suddenly. Tyler opened his bag and took out 2 papers. One was a receipt from a veterinary clinic. The other had a printed logo, a signature, a description of the dog's condition, and the line, "Euthanasia performed at the request of the presenter due to human-directed aggression." I held the papers. The writing was clear, the stamp legitimate. Everything looked solid, irrefutable. What did you do?" I asked, my voice tight. "I had to protect everyone," Tyler said slowly. "If he can attack me, he can attack you too. I didn't want anything worse to happen. I took care of it right away so you wouldn't have to worry." I stepped back. My heart clenched painfully. Shadow was Robert's final gift to me. The message Robert left when he could no longer protect me himself. I had promised to care for Shadow, and now— "I did the right thing, Mom," Tyler said. "Large dogs can snap without warning." I wanted to argue, but with the bandage, the paperwork, and the way he spoke, I felt cornered by a trust that had been manufactured in advance. Just then, Mrs. Harriet from next door stepped into her yard and called over the fence. I heard him barking wildly that day. I thought something was wrong. He must have been agitated, Marion. She spoke at the perfect moment, so perfectly that it felt like someone had pushed me into a well. I turned to Tyler. He maintained a serious expression, as if he had just handled a difficult responsibility. I need some time," I whispered. Tyler placed a small metal box on the doorstep. "His ashes are here. Put them wherever you think is right." I stared at the cold box, my hands shaking. It felt like the last living piece Robert left me had been taken away right before my eyes. "I know you're upset, but you'll understand why I had to do it," Tyler said before stepping off the porch. He got into his car, started the engine, and drove away. As the sound of the engine faded, I stood alone in front of my house. I held the box to my chest, feeling a vast emptiness open inside me. I no longer had Shadow. I no longer had Robert's final living reminder. And the worst part was, The only person who could confirm the truth was Tyler himself. For the first time, I felt completely isolated in my own home. 3 days after Tyler claimed Shadow had been put down, I still couldn't adjust to the silence in the house. Sometimes I glanced at the couch, waiting to hear Shadow shifting his weight. I knew I was lying to myself, but the thought made it easier to breathe. That night, at around 2 a.m., I heard noises in the yard again. At first, I thought it was just a cat, but the sound was heavier. Paws dragging against soil, labored breathing. I turned on the yard light and looked out. A 4-legged silhouette stood at the edge of the garden. As the light brightened, my knees nearly buckled. Shadow. He stood there, his body covered in scratches. Mud clung to his fur, and in some places the mud had dried into dark clumps of blood. His hind legs trembled repeatedly. I ran to him, my heart pounding with fear, relief, and pain all at once. Shadow. Good heavens. He nudged his head gently against my hand, his breath hot and heavy. There was a faint smell of gasoline on his fur, mixed with the strange damp scent of soil, the kind found in desolate suburban areas. He had traveled far to come back. I stroked his head, but Shadow immediately tugged lightly at my pant leg, then walked toward the far corner of the garden, the same spot he always dug. He looked at me for a moment, then began digging at the soft soil. "You want me to go there, don't you?" I whispered. Shadow answered by digging harder, despite the blood seeping from his paws. I knelt beside him. The soil was so loose that after just a few scoops, my fingers hit a layer that had clearly been dug up and filled in before. We dug together in silence, accompanied only by Shadow's ragged breathing and the sound of soil falling away. Something hard scraped against my fingertip. I pushed more dirt aside. A metal corner emerged. A military-style storage box, the kind used to hold ammunition, the type I had seen when Robert worked on his old defense project. Shadow stepped back, standing guard as if waiting for me to open it. I unlatched it. Inside were several white packages, vacuum-sealed, wrapped in multiple layers, marked with symbols and permanent marker. The faint chemical smell was unmistakable. I wasn't an expert, but even if I wished not to believe it, I knew exactly what I was looking at. Cocaine. Enough to destroy someone's life entirely. I picked up one package, my blood turning cold. Near the edge of the box, mixed with soil, I spotted a small fragment of gray fabric stuck to the metal. I pried it loose with my fingernail. Denim, torn from a forceful pull. The thread color matched the jeans Tyler often wore while gardening. I let the fabric drop. Shadow stood beside me, whimpering softly, urging me to understand what he had been trying to tell me for weeks. Tyler had buried this in my yard, in Robert's memorial garden. The dog he claimed had been killed now stood here, covered in blood and mud, having returned to show me the truth. I wrapped my arms around Shadow. He leaned his head against my shoulder, exhausted but still standing, as if he knew the most important part was just beginning. I looked at the metal box, then at the dark garden. My hands trembled, but this time not from fear, but from certainty. Robert had been right to send Shadow to me, and Tyler had made the biggest mistake of his life. I called Frank as soon as I had settled Shadow into the house. His voice on the line sharpened immediately when I told him that Shadow was alive and that I had found something buried in the garden. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, he said, without asking anything else. When Frank entered the kitchen, he looked at Shadow first. The dog lay on his side on the towel I had spread on the floor, breathing heavily but alert. Frank knelt and stroked his back gently. "Good boy, Shadow," he whispered. "I knew you'd come back." I had never heard Frank speak so tenderly, as if he were talking to an old teammate. "Frank," I said, "there's something you haven't told me, isn't there?" He stood and sighed. "I wanted to wait a bit longer, but now I can't hide it from you." He sat at the kitchen table where the military box lay between us. The overhead light poured down, the cold illumination making the white packages even more distinct. "Marion," Frank began, "Shadow is not an ordinary dog. He's a K9 who served nearly 8 years. Drug detection, tracking missing persons, assisting arrests. Robert chose him because he knew he didn't have much time left." I put my hand to my mouth, trying to remain calm. "What did Robert tell you?" I asked. Frank looked at me for a long moment before answering. "About 8 months before he died, Robert came to see me. He said Tyler had many odd things going on. More cash than his income could explain, late-night trips, frequently changing cars. Robert was a gentleman, but not unreasonably suspicious. He had reasons." I remembered times Robert would look at Tyler and fall silent. At the time, I thought he was simply worried because of his illness. "Robert asked me to check," Frank continued. "Not officially, just quietly to friends in the force, to see if there were any leads. And just as he feared, Tyler's name turned up in a few shady reports. Not enough to arrest him, but enough to understand he was involved in drug trafficking." I listened to each word, feeling the ground drop away beneath me. "Robert didn't tell you?" I asked, though I half knew the answer. Frank shook his head. "He was afraid you and Emily would get dragged into it. He said, 'I'm going soon, Frank. They need someone to stand in for me.' So I helped him find Shadow, a retired, reliable K9, one that could protect and, most importantly, recognize unusual signs." I looked at Shadow dozing in the corner. He seemed to understand and was ready if I called. Frank took an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Robert gave this to me just before his final stage. He told me to give it to you only if Tyler showed the worst of himself." I opened the envelope. Robert's handwriting appeared, familiar and slightly shaky. "Dearest Marion, if you are reading this letter, it means my worst fear has come true. I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer to protect you and Emily myself. Tyler is more dangerous than you think. Trust Frank. And please, however hard it is, protect Emily even if it means accepting a truth you don't want to face. I love you." Each line felt like it squeezed my heart. I set the letter down and tears fell uncontrollably. Frank said softly, "Robert prepared everything to protect you." I looked at Shadow once more. He opened his eyes and looked at me with a calm, determined gaze. "And now it's my turn," I whispered. Frank called a few old colleagues in the force that same night. They arrived faster than I expected, bringing recording equipment, infrared flashlights, and the tense, experienced faces of people who had seen a lot. I sat at the kitchen table, Shadow close to my feet, and listened as they discussed. The first thing they insisted on was this: "You can't rely solely on the fact that drugs were buried in my garden. If there's only the box in the ground, Tyler will deny it," one officer said. "He'll claim someone else buried it. Your neighborhood is quiet, no one would suspect. He knows that." Frank nodded. "We need to make him come back to retrieve the shipment. Then there'll be no way to deny it." I looked at the metal box on the table. The white packages sat silently inside, but their presence made the kitchen feel smaller. "So, how do we get him to return?" I asked. A younger officer said, "You just need a plausible reason for the garden to be dug up, ideally something that can't be delayed." Frank turned to me. "Marion, you could tell Tyler you want to renovate the entire memorial. Hire a landscaping crew to come Monday and dig out the beds." I understood immediately. If Tyler knew someone else was going to dig up the area where he buried the shipment, he would panic. He'd have to come and retrieve it before the crew began. I looked at Frank and asked quietly, "Is that dangerous?" "Yes," he said frankly, "but we'll intercept him before he reaches your house. You won't be alone." I nodded. Frank then crouched and stroked Shadow's head. "He needs care. Tyler thinks Shadow is dead, and that must remain the case." I felt choked up. Shadow lifted his head and licked my hand lightly, as if understanding he might be taken away from me once more. "Let me take Shadow home," Frank said. "I'll take him to my trusted vet tomorrow, tend his wounds, let him rest. When things are settled, I'll bring him back." I looked at Shadow, cupping his face gently. Rest a while. I need you well. Shadow nudged my palm like agreement. Frank lifted him up, light but secure, and carried him to the car. When they left, the house grew unusually quiet. I sat alone at the kitchen table. The calendar on the wall plainly showed that it was Thursday. There were only a few days until Monday. One of the officers placed a hand on my shoulder. You just need to play a normal mother-in-law. Invite Tyler to dinner on Friday. During the meal, mention hiring the landscaping team. Don't overdo it. Say it like any ordinary family matter. I nodded. I can do that. I've performed in court. A dinner is nothing. Frank looked at me, half smiling, half worried. Different, Marion. A court doesn't make your daughter so afraid she won't lift her head. Those words tightened my throat. I squeezed my hand. All the more reason to do it, I said. When the house was left with only me and the metal box, I knew clearly. This was the moment I had to stand up for Robert. If I didn't act, Emily would never escape the shadow Tyler had thrown over her life, and I would not let that happen. I prepared a completely ordinary dinner, trying to keep my hands from shaking as I set the utensils on the table. At 6:30, Tyler's car pulled up in front of the house. I peeked through the curtain. Emily stepped out slowly, her figure smaller than it had been just weeks ago. Tyler walked behind her, almost shepherding her at his side. When I opened the door, Emily forced a smile. Her eyes were darkened with fatigue, her shoulders drawn inward, as if one raised voice would make her collapse. "Are you all right?" I asked. "I'm fine," Emily answered, but she didn't look at me. Tyler entered last, his eyes darting around the room in a way that made me feel they weren't here for dinner, but to see if anything had changed inside my house. "What's for dinner tonight?" Tyler asked, sitting down at the head of the table like he owned the place. "Just a few simple dishes," I replied gently. He nodded without giving thanks. For the first 10 minutes of the meal, Tyler did most of the talking. He rambled about a big construction project, about workers who didn't do things the way he wanted, then turned to Emily. "Eat faster. Stop staring down like that." Emily flinched and forced herself to take another small bite. I watched her, my chest tightening. When I felt the moment had come, I took a slow breath and spoke in the most cheerful tone I could manage. "Oh, by the way, I have some news. I decided to redo the entire memorial garden for your father. I hired a landscaping crew to dig everything up on Monday morning." Tyler was lifting his water glass, but the motion stopped abruptly. A drop spilled onto his hand. He set the glass down harder than necessary, pretending to laugh. "Dig? The garden again?" "Yes, I want to make it nicer. They said they have to dig deep to reset the soil foundation. They'll probably scoop up all the old dirt." The skin on Tyler's neck turned pale. I could see him calculating. He tried to mask it, but not fast enough. "Monday?" he repeated, his voice tight. "That's right," I said, acting as if I hadn't noticed his reaction. "They said they'll start early, around 8. I already paid the deposit, so it's definitely happening this time." Emily glanced up slightly. There was worry in her eyes. Not about the garden, but about Tyler's reaction. He pressed his lips together, sat still for a few seconds, then abruptly stood. "I have to leave early. I've got work tomorrow," Tyler said. His tone rushed in a way that didn't make sense. He turned to Emily. "Let's go." "But I'm not finished," I began, but Tyler cut in. "She's done." Emily set down her fork immediately, like a reflex, not daring to meet my eyes. She stood, her napkin falling to the floor unnoticed. As they walked toward the door, I said softly, "Emily, if you need anything, you call me, all right?" She paused for a second, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something, but then glanced at Tyler standing behind her. She only managed a whisper. "Yes. Another time, Mom." Tyler placed his hand on her back, gently pushing her down the steps. Not a single goodbye. I watched their car pull away. Before turning at the corner, I saw Tyler lean toward Emily, saying something that made her shrink back. The door closed behind me. The silence was so absolute I could hear my heartbeat. The dinner bait had worked. Tyler had shown his panic. He would have to return to the garden. And this time, I wasn't alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I looked at the clock, the minute hand had only moved a tiny bit, yet it felt like I had waited an hour. The house was dark but far from quiet. Outside, the police had taken their positions early. They parked a few houses down, hidden behind trees, and walked in through the back route to station themselves around my yard. Frank texted, "We're here. If he shows up, everything will happen fast." I stood behind my bedroom curtain, looking out at the faint outline of the garden under the streetlights. The patch of soil Shadow had dug was like a wound waiting to be torn open completely. Around 1 a.m., everything was still. I began to fear Tyler might choose another time, or worse, he might suspect something and abandon the shipment altogether. But Frank had said people like Tyler never walk away from their product easily. It's money. It's power. It's the only thing they trust. 2:10 a.m., then 2:20. I leaned my head against the wall, eyes closed for a few seconds. 2:47. A slow movement at the corner of the street made me stand upright. A car rolled in without its headlights on, crawling forward until it stopped 3 houses away. The door cracked open, and a figure slipped out as if terrified of being seen. Tyler. I gripped the curtain tightly. He wore dark clothes, a cap pulled low over his face. A large canvas bag hung from his shoulder. In one hand, he carried a shovel, in the other, a flashlight, with a red filter to avoid detection. He didn't use the front gate, but hugged the fence line of the neighbor's yard, slipping through the narrow space between 2 bushes, the path he had checked on his earlier visits. He paused for a few seconds, scanned the surroundings, then stepped into my backyard. I breathed lightly, barely daring to move. Tyler crouched over the patch of soil Shadow had dug before. He swept his light around once, then began digging. His movements were intense and frantic, nothing like the careful gardening he'd done earlier. Dirt flew everywhere. Sweat dripped from his forehead even in the cool night air. Within minutes, the shovel hit metal. He dropped to his knees and scraped away the remaining soil with his hands, freeing the box. When he opened the lid and saw the intact white packages, he exhaled, the relief so heavy his whole body sagged. He began stuffing the packages into the canvas bag. I heard footsteps in the distance, very soft, then whispers over radios. The shadows of officers appeared from multiple directions. When the last package was put into the bag, the backyard floodlights suddenly came on. Tyler jerked upright, shielding his face instinctively. Then a commanding shout rang out. "Police! Tyler Grant, drop the bag and put your hands up!" Tyler sprang to his feet. He scanned for an escape route, saw the back fence, and bolted. He climbed halfway over when, at the far end of the yard, I saw Frank release a familiar silhouette. Shadow. My breath caught. He sprinted as if he had never been injured. Frank barked a command in German, his voice firm and sharp. Shadow leapt onto the fence just as Tyler was preparing to jump. He clamped onto Tyler's arm and yanked him backward. Tyler lost his balance and fell hard into my yard, screaming in pain. 2 officers rushed in, restraining him within seconds. Shadow stayed just a few feet away, growling low, ready if Tyler tried to break free. They cuffed Tyler while he was still cursing. They hauled him to his feet, his hair a mess, his face ashen when he spotted me standing at the doorway. You set me up!" he shouted. I didn't answer. Frank stepped forward, blocking him, and said plainly, "You set yourself up, Tyler." As they dragged him toward the patrol car, I felt my legs grow lighter. It was as if a weight that had been crushing my family for years had finally lifted. Shadow walked over and rested his head against my knee. I knelt down and wrapped my arms around him. His breathing was strong but steady, as if he knew his mission was complete. I didn't sleep that night, but for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. I only felt relief, and the certainty that tomorrow Emily would finally have a chance to live. I couldn't sleep after that night. Even though Tyler had been taken away, I still sat at the kitchen table waiting for the sun to rise, my hand resting on Shadow's head as he slept beside my feet. Every time I remembered the moment he was dragged out of my backyard, I felt a little lighter. Around 7 in the morning, a soft knock sounded at the door. When I opened it, Emily stood there, a thin jacket on, hair messy, eyes red as if she'd cried all night. Her hands trembled slightly like she'd gathered every bit of courage she had to come. "Mom." Just one word, small and broken. I pulled her inside and shut the door. As soon as she stepped into the kitchen, Emily saw Shadow lying on the towel, lifting his head when he noticed her. She froze, then raised a hand to her mouth. "Shadow? He's alive?" I nodded. "He came back. Found his way home." Emily sat down, her shoulders trembling with tiny, uneven shivers. It took her a while before she could speak. "Mom, I'm sorry." I sat beside her and took her cold hands. "There's nothing to be sorry for. You're safe today." Emily shook her head. "No, I'm sorry for not telling you sooner." Then slowly, as if unlocking a door that had been jammed for years, Emily began to talk. Tyler had been controlling her long before they married. It began with minor criticisms, then progressed to interference in small decisions. Then came the sudden anger, forbidding her from seeing friends, forbidding her from visiting me unless he was with her. Then the squeezing of her hand was hard enough to silence her, the bruises on her arms, on her back. Once he threw things at her because she answered him in a way he didn't like. I kept thinking, if I just did everything right, he would change, Emily said, her voice cracking. But the more I endured, the worse he got. I squeezed her hands tighter. Emily lowered her head. Dad found out first, but I begged him not to say anything. I was scared. Scared Tyler would hurt him while he was sick. The words stabbed straight into my heart. I remembered the times Robert would look at Emily for a long moment without saying anything. He had seen his daughter suffering and couldn't help. After Dad died, everything got even worse, Emily continued. He told me if I tried to leave, he'd kill me, then kill you. He said he'd make it look like an accident. I wrapped my arms around her. She broke into tears, choked and exhausted, as if releasing years of being held hostage by her own fear. Mom, I was scared. I was scared every day. I didn't know where to even begin to get out. I stroked her hair, my heart aching so deeply it felt like it might tear. Emily, I said slowly and clearly, older people. We're not always right, but we will always try to protect you, no matter what. She buried her face in my shoulder, crying harder. I held her close, feeling like I had finally gotten back the daughter I'd been losing little by little for years. Shadow padded over and lay down beside Emily's feet. She leaned down and stroked his head. And for the first time during the entire conversation, she smiled. A small smile, but real, gentle, relieved. You're safe now, I whispered. Everything starts changing today. And that morning in our small kitchen, I understood more clearly than ever. A family, no matter how wounded, can begin again when we dare to face the truth and hold on to each other one more time. What followed after the night Tyler was arrested felt like a storm slowly fading. There were still patches of gray cloud, but I knew peace would come at last. A few weeks later, the court sentenced Tyler. 25 years in federal prison, no early release, no leniency. When I heard the sentence, I didn't feel joy or triumph. I only felt light. Light because he could no longer hurt Emily or anyone else. Light because what Robert feared at the end of his life had finally come to the surface. Emily moved back in with me right after that. She brought a few small bags and the exhaustion of years. We didn't talk much at first. We just ate together, slept in rooms close to each other, and let things settle at a slow, natural pace. And I remember one morning, Emily walked into the kitchen with her hair neatly tied up, holding a cup of coffee. She said something straightforward. Mom, I can breathe easier today. I only smiled, but inside I wanted to hug her tightly. Emily began seeing a therapist recommended by Frank. It wasn't always easy for her to open up, but each week she stood a little straighter, looked people in the eye a bit more, and smiled more freely. A few months later, Emily decided to leave her old job, the one Tyler had forced her to keep so he could monitor her, and accepted an accounting position at a small office near the house. I saw her returning to who she truly was: gentle, hard-working, able to smile without fear. Shadow changed as well, though in a much softer way. After the night he lunged at Tyler, his leg had weakened a bit, and he didn't move as fast as before, but he still loved lying on the front step, the exact spot where Robert used to sit every morning with his tea. Shadow didn't need to run anymore, didn't need to stay alert every second. He just lay there, ears twitching once in a while at the sound of Emily or me moving around. One afternoon I sat beside him, gently running my hand down his back. He looked up at me as if to say, "Everything's all right now." When spring arrived, I began rebuilding the memorial garden. I removed everything Tyler had built, every stone, every plank of wood, as if peeling away the last remnants of what he had tried to hide. Then I replanted the things Robert loved: 5-colored chrysanthemums, soft-scented roses, and a few small lavender bushes. I placed Robert's photo in the sunniest corner. When the afternoon light passed through, the garden looked peaceful. Emily helped me water the plants, and Shadow lay between us, eyes half closed, and I realized this garden was no longer a place of sorrow. It was the end of a long journey, one where truth was unearthed and our family found each other again. One morning, as we sat on the new bench, I told Emily quietly, "Robert didn't just leave me memories. He left protection that reached beyond time. When we cherish family and listen to those who came before us, sometimes we save a whole life." Emily leaned her head on my shoulder, and Shadow breathed steadily at our feet. And in that moment, I knew I had walked a very long road and finally arrived at the peace I deserved.